are we anywhere near the physiological ceiling of what a trail running shoe can do for performance, or do you still have a lot of open questions around what's coming down the pipeline?
For a trail running shoe, no. Like that, I think that's still a lot of opportunity, like very exciting opportunity. But it's such a complex system that is designing a shoe for the trails. Not to say the least, like that every trail is different and has different demands. So, like on the road, I don't know as we're near the ceiling for what we can do, but I think just in maybe even the last year, we've gotten a lot closer on the asymptote of like what we're approaching within the design space that's allowed by regulations. And that was part of the motivation for like, you know, proposing kind of the idea of regulating things around thickness. But within that space, just given the materials, just theoretically speaking, I guess we could start there of like what on the roads is kind of the design space and the optimization problem.
Please.
And then the trail, we can just talk about how the trails blow it up. But yeah, so on the roads, like the things that make super shoes beneficial, or, this next generation of footwear, is two interacting elements that kind of need each other to function well and be beneficial, and are not that beneficial on their own. And so that's advanced foams that have better energy return. Resilience would be the mechanical term we would use, better resilience, and increased compliance. Softness would be the lay term there. So higher resiliency, better energy return, higher compliance, softer, and then critically lighter. So those kind of three things are what the new generation of polymers bring to the table. And that kind of opened up the Pandora's box, was these foams arriving in footwear. The reason why in the subclass of the foam, because we're going to talk about the foam and then the stiff architecture within it, in the subclass of the foam, the reason why you need all three of those, and really I would say that the interaction of the resiliency and the compliance is the more energy. You can think in terms of a perfect spring. So a perfect spring has 100% energy return, no hysteresis, no energy loss. If you stretch it, might bring back or let's go the other way, compress it. So you compress the spring, it's going to give back all of the energy that you put into it. Now, the softer and softer that spring is, for a given force, a given load, you can store more and more energy because it's related to the change in length. So the softer and softer you go, keeping energy return the same and the force the same. And when we run, the peak forces for a given speed that we're putting into the shoe are roughly the same. So the softer and softer you go, constraining energy return, the more and more energy you can store and return in that system. So that's one of the reasons why softer is better when there's good energy return. Softer is not better if you have bad energy return, because then you're just storing a ton of energy and not getting it back. The extreme sense, that's running on sand. And I would say EVA foam of old fell into that. So like a Hoka shoe that had, I use them because they were the first ones to come out with really thick EVA shoe or EVA midsoles. That's not necessarily going to be beneficial because it's soft and you got a lot of it, but you lose so much of it with every step. Now, once you get to the new foams that started returning 80+% energy as opposed to the 60, 70% that we were working with old, you start to shift the calculus there and it becomes beneficial. Now, so that's the foam. You need it to have good energy return, but then you also, in order to get better and better, it needs to get softer and softer and softer. Now, there's also like an optimization there in that the degree of softness that you go to is an interesting question, because if you went infinitely soft and it just like immediately compressed, what ends up happening is this phenomenon of bottoming out the shoe. So you compress it to the point that it can no longer absorb. And so that's, once you start limiting the thickness of that spring, there becomes a compliance that is self-limiting, because you can't get, if it's so soft that it compresses, the limitation now is 40 millimeters. You compress that, and you can't necessarily get it all back, or you waste energy. So it needs to be the exact right softness to get maximum compression and return during the ground contact time. And I don't think we're necessarily like there, but a couple companies now, Puma and Saucony, have come out with shoes that have pushed it even further from the original iterations of the super shoes. The foams, Puma's shoe, we have lab data on them that it's in the high 80s for energy return. The Saucony shoe, I haven't seen any lab data. I haven't been able to do any of that benchtop testing myself on those. They claim it's in the mid 90s, which is insane. Like that's approaching a perfect spring, and it's extremely soft. Like I've run in them and it feels like they've, gotten close to that kind of like optimal softness. So I think in the design space now, we're getting there on the roads. Now, one of the tricky things is, I just talked about the foams. The other piece that makes the super shoe is the plate. And this is also one that is extremely tricky to do in trail shoes. But what we found with how soft and squishy these foams are, there needs to be rigid architecture that helps the foot move through the foot strike. And it's still being unpacked exactly how and why that plate is beneficial. The original thought around it was that it stiffened up the metatarsal phalangeal joint, so the ball of your foot, and reduced some of the negative work in the process of moving through foot strike that goes through that joint in your ankle joint. That was debunked a little bit, I would say, by a fun study that Wouter Hoogkamer did at UMass Amherst, and they cut the bottom of the shoe, and you still saw a benefit in the shoe. I think it could be the study was done super well. It could have been that the degree of degradation was below what you could detect with the number of subjects you were doing or something like that. But it wasn't like it wholesale removed the effect of the shoe. It was still a beneficial shoe that they couldn't, detect a difference from the normal shoe. So that kind of threw a wrench into that theory. But there's also one of the things that I am partial to think plays a role is this idea of it behaving sort of as a stress diffuser. You could think of like if you put two sponges together and you put a rigid plate between them, you could put a point compression, push your finger into the top sponge, and you could bottom out that sponge, but it diffuses the forces over the entire volume of the sponge below it. And so that's one of the tricks with these new foams is you don't want extreme point compression because they behave non-linearly. So the more they're compressed, the more they get much stiffer. It's not like displacement compression is normally on a perfect spring is a linear line. These have a non-linear trend. So I think keeping the foam in this very soft, beneficial region of its material properties, I think the plate could be doing that. And it could be, simply that it forces the foot to move through a constrained, efficient movement path through this volume of marshmallowy foam. So we're still kind of understanding that. But what we do know is that you need them together. A carbon fiber plate in a shoe with old foam is not beneficial, or barely beneficial if done perfectly well. The new foam on its own is not crazy beneficial either, but it's very much like, it's what we call an interaction. So it's really not, it's not 3 + 3 = 6. It's 3 × 3 = 9. So yeah. So anyways, so that's kind of the formula on the roads. The trick is that all of those things are somewhat fragile to the environment that they're in. Anybody who's running super shoes on the road knows that like you go around a hard 90-degree corner and you're kind of chopping your strides, and it's tricky, let alone go out on a trail and every step is different and the substrate is non-uniform, uneven. So yeah, so it's everything that we know on the roads. It's almost like you could think of like it's like a benchtop lab experiment, right? We have a hyper controlled thing to optimize it within. So we know, okay, these foams, these plate shapes, things like that are very beneficial and enhancing performance. But the problem is that the optimization problem on the roads is so simple. It's what in, 98% of cases, 99% of moments is like, what enhances energy efficiency moving in a straight flat line? And yeah, all of these things change as soon as you start moving the body unevenly. Because you could think of what shoes essentially do are adding a spring in series to the bottom of the foot. And all of a sudden, if the bounce of the body is non-uniform as it is on trails, like that becomes different, let alone, other areas, we need to like think about in terms of traction, weight, height, stability, like all of these things that kind of defy some of the optimizations you make on the road. So so I think I'm not going to say we've solved it on the roads, but I think it's coming close to saturation. I thought where we're at now with, I would say, what Saucony and Puma have seemed to do in just the last year, I thought that it would take us probably, 5 to 10 years to get there. But, in one swoop of like better materials and I would say more intentional design, in Puma's case with the plate, got pretty close. So I think on the trails, there's a couple things going on.
Let me ask one question about the roads. You said we're near saturation. Based on your observations, are we seeing pretty much all of the major player shoe brands converge around basically the same formula?
Yes and no. Yes, I would say the form of the super shoe has yes, like very much converged. And I would say in the sense that you have, and it's almost comical how long it took some of the companies to like, start cooking with this recipe. But, it's like for up until the last year or two, it's like, just make a shoe with PIBA foam and a plate through it. And like the plate has to be a little bit curved underneath the MTP joint, but that's it. Like that's, that'll get you pretty darn close to the original Vaporfly. But now I would say with the shift in foams, with now understanding that there are better foams beyond PIBA or different ways to work with PIBA to be even more beneficial, the form is staying the same. I would say Puma's one that's like changed it a little bit, but it's still not like wholesale changing it.
Okay.
So all of them follow the same architectural guidelines. I would say, though, those two brands currently, as we're talking now, are likely more beneficial than for a lot of people than the other major players, which I think is the first time that's happened, which is interesting. But yes, in terms of the actual architecture of the shoes, super similar now across brands.
This episode of the Singletrack Podcast is brought to you by Precision Fuel and Hydration. One of the biggest nutritional shifts for me has been dialing in hourly carb, sodium, and fluid rates based on sweat rate, race conditions, goals. And what I really appreciate about Precision's role in this is that they don't push a one-size-fits-all product. Instead, they start with their fuel and hydration planner, which takes a few minutes to complete and gives you a clear, personalized plan for your next race or long effort. If you've ever wondered, am I underfueling, overhydrating? Why does this fall apart late? That planner is the best place to start. If you want to check it out, go to precisionhydration.com/planner, or just use the link in our show notes, and you can use the code SingleTrack for 15% off your first order as well. Thanks to Precision for supporting the show and for bringing some much needed clarity to ultra running nutrition. Yeah, and obviously on the trail side of things, multiple brands have multiple different points of view currently about what makes a trail shoe super for the same race. For example, we in our market, we still haven't decided as a community what composition of plate, foam, upper, etc. leads to the best technological setup for a race like Western States or UTMB. Some people say like there's a carbon plate involved. Some say a nylon plate. Some say it's just foam and focusing on stability of that foam. Like talk about your thoughts here and what you're seeing.
Yeah, and so this is where the trail is just like the trails are so complicated for this question. And I don't know if you like start or finish with this idea, but every trail is so different. Running at Western, I haven't run on the UTMB trail. I've run in the Alps. Like that's very different than Western states. And these are, the two biggest trail races in our sport. So the design problem for those could be fundamentally different, or at least I would say that the optimization should be different. I mean, in 2016, like Jim was wearing, I think Adios, the Adidas
Boost,
Adios,
right?
yeah,
the Boost,
yeah, the Adios Pro, or not Pro, yeah, it was the one Dennis Cometto set the world record in it.
Yeah,
road shoe. So, like that, what you do on that trail is so different than others. Let alone, every other trail in the world that has different requirements. I mean, there are different shoe optimality. I live here in Manitou Springs, and there are different shoe optimalities for different weather conditions on the trails, like different times of year. So that alone is, I think, one of the interesting things of like, what is the demands of the trail that make it good or bad. But then I also think there are still some like pretty general design aspects that have not been ironed out well. And this could be, I mean, some of this could be very individualized, but like what, the foams we're using, I think it's hard to imagine that a foam with bad energy return is going to be bad. And so like, so what's that's saying is shift away from using EVA foam. Although, and this is like, I don't know, I could make a case in my head. I don't know if I would bet on it, but like a shoe that's a dampener, which EVA is. So if it only returns 60% of energy, it loses a lot of energy. So it functions as a dampener. That could be good on trails. Like in some cases where, especially if you're bombing downhill, like your mechanical task when you're running downhill is actually losing energy, because every footstep is braking, and if your shoe can dissipate some of that energy comfortably for you, that's actually a good thing, because then it's not your muscles trying to function eccentrically to do that. Moreover, like just having something very soft that absorbs uneven substrate, rocks, could be good. So like on the trails, you might not be as penalized for that. I think that may just make it so that the effect of the foams is less obvious. I would still bet heavily on new generation foams and their benefit over EVA. So but then tailoring that softness, I think, is an interesting question for the trails, because your ground contact time on the trails is highly non-uniform. Every step is very different. Sometimes you have to take a super rapid, footstep. Sometimes it's, much longer and you're trying to establish grip and stability. I mean, these things don't necessarily happen consciously, but like on the roads, you go run at a steady clip, say you're racing a marathon, your ground contact might, be oscillating between 180 and 195 milliseconds or something like that, just throwing numbers out there. It's pretty constrained. On the trails, it might go between like, I don't know, 90 or 100 and like 300 distribution. So like you have this enormous window of how you're manipulating and changing your foot strike, which changes what is ideal for that softness of the shoe. So that's one. And then I think that one of the biggest challenges with the super shoes is like how you integrate the plate into the shoe. I think you could get away with doing just a generally pretty soft, highly resilient foam, in the form of the Piba foams that we have now. And I think the fundamental challenge is how you integrate the rigid architecture in there, because it's like you need the rigid architecture to get the benefit of the foam, but the rigid architecture is a huge liability on the trails. So it's like the common way that we've seen the brands do this is like decoupling the plates laterally. So yeah, which I think seems to be good. I mean, I enjoy the shoes that have done that well. I think Nike was kind of the first one to market with a pseudo trail super shoe. They went the route of just not having a full length plate. I think the next generation of that, it sounds like, is going to be, they're moving to the kind of decoupled architecture. So I think we're starting to see that, brands kind of converge on that as the strategy of how to use the foam with having something rigid in there. So my guess is we're kind of like arriving at that being a solution. The interesting thing is, like, for the trails, I wouldn't see us moving in the direction, like, we don't have regulations on the trails like you do on the roads, but I think it's like very obviously self-limiting. A like 50 millimeter, 60 millimeter shoe might be very challenging from a stability perspective on the trails. So yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of are converging. I think we're going to still see developments. I think this probably one of the biggest opportunities on the trails is figuring out the weight piece. Weight is extremely expensive to carry on our feet. You know, the rule of thumb.
1 pound per. What's the ratio there?
It's 100 grams is 1%
Wow.
efficiency. Yeah. So if a pound is 450 grams, that's one of the ways that I would kind of explain the benefit of the Vaporfly to people, you know, that like very famously had 4% efficiency gain. It's like, it's the equivalent of like that versus, you know, an old shoe of like putting an extra pound on your feet, like just a pound ankle weight on each foot, you know, because that would be about a 4.5% decrement in running economy to do that.
Was the Bowerman quote, was it like one, it was like 1 ounce sliced off is equivalent to 5 pounds over a mile? Is that also true?
I think it's probably in the ballpark of true. That's some good artistic napkin science, I think. But you know, it's like, but I think it's probably in the ballpark. But yes, the like that idea of you know 1% for 100 grams. But I think the crazy thing though is like, I would bet, I haven't seen a good study that looked at that on gradients. I think there has been one done, but I'd like to see something more robust, especially at different gradients. I would bet on that getting blown up at higher, the more you run uphill, in the sense that like hip flexion is expensive metabolically. And so raising something with your foot is not cheap. We're not super efficient at doing that. That's why like pulling up when you pedal cycling is not a good idea. So anyway, so I would bet on weight running uphill being more than that, which then I think, you know, is the question in trails. Like, I mean, Matt Carpenter here at the Pikes Peak Marathon, like he used to race in the Nike Zoom Marathoner, you know, like lightest possible shoe to get up the mountain. And I don't know, it's like a suicide wish running down, but that's him. But yeah, I think it speaks to the idea that like you want to run uphill, you want the lightest thing possible on your feet. And so one of the challenges with trail shoes then, like getting back to like figuring out the foam plate thing, also trying to figure out the right like rubber configuration, because you need really good rubber for good predictable traction, but like rubber is heavy. So I would say on the trails, I think there's enormous space. I would guess there's more room for like optimization or shaving time off by figuring out like very innovative traction compounds. Because we're still using rubber, you know, as like, you know, Vibram has their own ways to do different things, but like at its core, it's still, I believe it's all still, you know, variants of polyurethane, which is just dense.
Yeah.
And what's more, that's always kind of been curious to me is like, we put it over the entire bottom of the shoe. Like at a minimum, I would think we could not do that. And then that, like one of my thoughts of like another area for optimization there is like, I think one of the reasons we do that is, yes, it's great to have traction over all of that, but I'm pretty sure like we have very distinct spots on our feet that we need good traction, and very distinct spots that if we do not have good traction would be pretty inconsequential in the vast majority of cases. Now, I think one of the reasons we cover the whole bottom of a shoe, you don't have exposed foam, is you would just destroy the shoe. It would rip it up so fast. But if I'm trying to win Western States, if I'm trying to win UTMB, do I care if my shoes do not last me like beyond that race? Heck no. Like, no way. Like, so I'm curious if we arrive at a point of like single-use shoes for elite trail running. I think there's opportunity there of like foams that are very beneficial and don't last as long, and then rubber setups that are not built to last, but just built to function for a race. So I don't know. That's one area. And then of course, like, this is not even talking about like the uppers, right? Of like, I don't know, I love what Hoka did on the Tecton X with the Gator. Like, I think that was a cool innovation, but not all companies are doing it. That in itself adds weight. And it's then becomes this question of like, well, the interesting thing, further on the trails of like the optimization problem is like all of these tweaks you make to get small marginal improvements, if they come at the cost of opening you up to the risk of a black swan event, like a fall or something like that, that either takes you out of the race or something to slow you down, like, then you just erase all of that immediately in one fell swoop. So it's like that, that challenge. It's funny. It's that same like design problem is like literally what our bodies evolutionarily have designed themselves to do. We're master optimizers of movement patterns. It's one of the reasons why it's not good to like consciously try and manipulate your running form. Your body is so good at figuring out its natural, most naturally efficient and economical movement pattern. And to consciously manipulate it is the recipe for, at best, inefficiency, at worst, injury. But so anyway, so our bodies are so good at figuring this out because their dominant constraint is energy minimization. But it's not 100% energy minimization. It's a multi-objective optimization. The other is safety and stability. So at all times, your body is like trying to mostly optimize its movement pattern to be as most efficient, but also kind of keeping its hand on the brakes a little bit, giving you some ability to respond to perturbations. And so I think that's kind of the same when you think of the road versus trail thing. It's like on the road, you can almost 100% optimize for pure economy and efficiency. You don't have to worry about diverse challenges that you're going to have to potentially deal with. Or on the trail, that becomes an enormous part of it. Is it's fragility versus robustness, right? Like the trail shoe is super fragile to any other condition. The trail shoe has to be pretty robust. And the question for like, this is true of optimization in any facet, whether it's, our athletic performance or shoes, whatever, is like the more and more you optimize for one thing, the more and more fragile you become to it. And so at what point do you have to always make a conscious decision of like, how much do I put down on this one hand and, risk losing, everything if it doesn't come. So it's like that idea of like extreme optimization for one task while also maintaining some degree of robustness to a variety of conditions. And so I think that's going to be fundamentally the thing, that there's never going to be a solution on the trails. And this is probably one of the reasons why trail running is beautiful, is like, it's like, it's not a math problem. I mean, it's not necessarily this math problem that you can solve, because like a trail, and this is even like getting back to that example of the trails here being different all the time, is like a trail is like a 4-dimensional organism. It exists in 3 dimensions, but also in time, and it's constantly evolving and changing. So like even Western states, that's like a pretty uniform trail. The trail's different every year, like snow conditions, how hot and dry it is, like that changes, that evolves. So if you wanted like the single best shoe for it, it's still gonna be different every year. So yeah, so I don't know. I think that's a 30-minute way to answer your question of like, we're probably not there yet for trails.
And as I've been looking, I've been taking notes just to follow up on some stuff. Yeah. One comment and then one question. Comment, I was listening to, you mentioned Jim Walmsley earlier, and I do see him as this sort of brilliant mad scientist athlete in the sport in a lot of ways that go unrecognized. But he mentioned in a recent interview with Dylan Bowman on the Free Trail podcast that, and this kind of speaks also just to like the open questions and the uncertainties around trail shoe tech, but I guess him and his team at Hoka have this theory that, for example, the black Vibram outsole is the one to go with over other colors because it's more grippy. There's something in the color additives on these outsoles that complicate the grippiness of the outsole. So like when he was getting ready for OCC this year, after all this training, he opted for the black outsole, which I find fascinating. Just like that's one small, I guess, minute detail, but that's the level to which they're tuning things.
Yeah, it could be. And it does get back to this is something that I would say I'm relatively new to trail running, like just, I would say, going hard into it in the last couple of years, as opposed to doing road ultra stuff before that. The rubber and grip question is one that's like, that was one of the first things that like blew up to me, like as I started working with trail shoes, of like, holy cow, this is like, there is so much nuance here that is like, I think not understood and not unpacked. Part of it's because, understanding the energy cost of different rubbers is challenging. You could do coefficient of friction measurements on them, but like, rubber behaves differently even once you start using it a little bit, right? Of like, yeah. So, I would believe it, from just, again, the base mixture versus as soon as you add in these things, like it could change the chemistry a little bit. Again, I do think there's a way to test that. Like you can test the coefficient of friction of things relatively easy. If they haven't done that, I'd encourage them to do it. But I like, also, this is Vibram, so I would hope that they're probably doing that. But it could also be though that, like, I don't know, the different colors hold heat differently. Maybe less so if you're working.
Foams certainly do, right? There's differences in foams. Like some
absolutely.
are more
That's
temperature resistant than others.
I would say the rubber pieces, due to color, is probably less.
Yeah.
Not very much. But foams, absolutely. That's I would say it's kind of one of the overlooked benefits of most of the newer foams, is they're so much more thermally stable. EVA was like a disaster. It was rock hard in cold weather and super squishy in the heat, whereas the new foams are much more robust across a range of temperatures. Yeah.
If we were to like do like a little bit of a history lesson here and sort of contextualize where we think we're at in the performance moment for trail, I'm going to make the assumption that we are nowhere close to the equivalent of a Vaporfly moment. Like there are still so many open questions out there. We're not at that Vaporfly moment yet, but like comparatively speaking, are we at a moment where it's like the equivalent of when TPU came to roads in the early 2010s? Or are we going as far back as like when Brooks brings EVA to the market in the 70s?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't know if there's an analogy. I think it might be closer. I think it might be a diluted Vaporfly effect. Like, I think there is a step change of the shoes, but also there are just aspects of the shoes that aren't quite as obviously beneficial. Again, getting back to like I think you could have very high level success with the old shoe. Even, I don't know, I can't extrapolate this to like the other athletes, but I've done overground testing in different trail super shoes. One of the nice things about being in Colorado is we have a lot of dirt tracks. So you can do like, we have portable metabolic carts. So throw those on outside. And I remember being very curious about the original North Face super shoe. Yeah. I found it really comfortable to run in, whatever. But like, I've also learned with super shoes is like, your feelings don't really matter. Like sometimes something feels great and you go in the lab and it's not as efficient. Like we're good at sensing gross changes in efficiency, but to pick up small percentage differences, is a lot of people are not reliably good at that. Anyways, so that shoe, I remember being skeptical of it though, because I believe it was a mixture, is an EVA blend with a new polymer, which I don't like those. Like I think it's, I had this old boss, I like worked in the automotive industry. He used to say, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. So blending with EVA, I think, is probably not the best thing. Anyways, the shoe was very distinctly not as good as the Nike Ultrafly that I was comparing it against at the time. One of the other only only other super shoes on the market, or super trail super shoes. And I don't know, I look at like, you know, Zach Miller, you know, had crushed UTMB in that shoe. I mean, this is the question I ask all the time in the sports science world, is like, in spite of or because of, you know, who knows? Same with, I mean, Katie had phenomenal performances in that, but I also think, I'm like, if they were in a different shoe, could it be even better?
Yeah, because like if I'm looking at 2016 and all else being equal, I see one pair of shoes. It's the 2016 Vaporfly on one runner. The other runner, it's like the Skechers Go Meb Racer. I think I know who's winning that battle off marginal gains.
Yeah.
But you're saying maybe Zach had that at UTMB.
Yeah. So anyways, but what that gets at though is like, there could be like the difference, the fact that it was a few percentage points less efficient, like that could wash out on the trail for different reasons. Whether it's, you know, how the rocker is more stable, or the way that, again, the gripper is, the rubber and the grip is maybe more beneficial, or whatever. So I think to answer your question of like that step change moment, I think it's kind of a more continual evolution. It might be that for Western states though, you know, of like in a, you know, that's such a much more constrained, predictive. The other thing we didn't even talk about this, the benefits of the super shoes. I should have talked about this on the trail. We do have studies that have nicely shown the benefit goes down when you go uphill. And it also appears to go down when you're going downhill. It's hard to do good, accurate measurements of, or it's hard to get people to like be comfortable running downhill on treadmills, or at least like on steep enough grades. But the same lab that showed the benefits of the Vaporfly did this nice gradient study. And so they're still beneficial, but less so. So it's like, if you do, getting back to that example, say these North Face shoes of like, it's a couple percentage points different, me running on a flat dirt track. It may be smaller when we start going up and down moderate gradients, and maybe completely washed out when you're going up very steep up and down gradients. And at that point, the characteristics of the shoe that make it more stable, especially on the downhill, are like, or more just natural for your own interaction with the ground, or the thing that are probably going to trump the benefit. So anyway, so that gradient question is one. But let's go back to like, say, Western states. That's probably of all the major trail races that we have, is probably the easiest one to like think about optimizing a shoe for it. Just because so much of it is run on pretty predictable, homogeneous trail. Yeah, I think the new generation of shoes are probably like a step forward, but I think there's still like, I mean, I thought, did Ruth Croft switch shoes at one point of wearing like a straight up road super shoe? Like, she runs for Adidas, I think. I thought that happened either this year or last year. I could be wrong about that, but I thought I remember hearing one of the top women doing that. And I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of cases where if you have like a long stretch of dirt road, like you could get minutes on wearing just a straight up road super shoe. So I don't know. I think there's probably still a lot of area for further optimization. I don't know I don't think we're ever going to have a moment of like, boom, this has introduced massive step change in all trail performances. I don't think that'll happen. I think it's just going to be this like diffusion across trail demands of figuring out what works for what. Yeah.
One of the things that I've wondered recently is if EVA is so inferior to all of the latest foams that are coming out, why does it still exist on the market?
I mean, it's cheap, like, to manufacture. It's been done forever. So all of these companies like have very embedded manufacturing practices, supply chains, like they know how to cook with that, and it's much, much cheaper. And for most people, maybe it doesn't matter, you know, like if you're not taking shoes to the limit, yeah, so it checks, like, we got by 40, plus years with it. I think it's being embedded in the pipelines of these companies is a major one. Not being directly in the industry and knowing that the ins and outs of those sides of it, I would just have to think that the manufacturing and development side of it is the thing that is maintaining. And I'll go further to add, though.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why people buy, like, I worked in a running shoe store for, growing up for many years. Like, people don't buy shoes because they go to a lab and test them and see what's most efficient. They buy shoes because they put them on in a shoe store, stand in them, and say, oh yeah, that feels more comfortable. That feels better than that. Like, you don't feel energy return when you're standing in a running shoe store or walking in a running shoe store. Like, you can massively manipulate the perception of somebody's, like, shoe experience by changing the insole that they're in, because that's what you make that first engagement with the shoe. It's like it completely biases your perception. EVA is so good for that because it's like so soft and squishy and it feels good. And I don't know if the cynic in me, I don't think this is part of the calculation, but like, it's not very durable. The shoes have a bit of a planned obsolescence to them. Like TPU, that was, Boost, Adidas Boost. That stuff is so good as a training foam. Like, it, it's like, it's not going to be necessarily, well, now we're finding different ways to make it ultra light and more resilient, whatever. But as in its kind of original form when it came out as Boost, yeah, it's not going to be the best race day shoe anymore, but it is so good for training because it is so robust. It lasts so long. It holds up. And yeah, that's probably not any company, like, they're making the calculation of like what's going to be the most profitable thing. And like, it could be a very, there is this simple thing of like, well, if that lasts twice as long, like, are we going to sell that many less shoes? That's not as simple as that, because then that becomes the value proposition and that could pull market share away from other companies. But in a world where nobody used EVA anymore and shoes lasted twice as long, like, that's not as enticing. I don't think that's what's going on, but like, you could there is a cynical thought there, but I think it has to do more simply with just cost to manufacture, ease of manufacture embedded in the pipelines. Like, it's going to take a long time for the super foams to be like, they're just exponentially more complex to work with from a manufacturing standpoint.
Yeah, because I have a lot of open questions with carbon plates, for example. It's like, should you ratio your training in them? Can you adapt to a carbon plate? Like, I have questions there, but from what I understand, there isn't any like injury risk or cost to training a lot in these higher performing foams. So I've always wondered, like, when does EVA just go away completely?
Yeah, hopefully soon. I don't know. There is still like, and this is where I don't have a great answer for that, but like, to me, the question for training with EVA is actually more has to do with the durability of it. I don't like that. When you run slow enough, the benefits of the super, and this is another thing we didn't talk about on the trails. The benefit of the shoes seems to be speed related. We've, me and one of my friends and collaborators published a paper on this, looking at the benefit of the shoes across slower and slower speeds. They get less beneficial as you go slower and slower. There are a lot of times for most ultra runners that like you're not even running. So don't tell anyone, but like, there's a whole meme account devoted to that concept. But yeah, like, at some point, like, in a lot of instances, you're going uphill, going very slowly. The shoes, the foam, those things probably aren't even beneficial. I think the durability side of it, though, is very compelling for training, in terms of staying injury free or whatever. Now, yeah, so that's another thing that's complicated in the trail optimization. Again, Western states as the example of like, the elite athletes are running pretty fast for a lot of the race to the point where it is beneficial. They're not running like, 4:30 per mile. But anyways, where are we going with that? Oh yeah. So training. I think that, this idea that like you might not even get the benefits, the energetic benefits of the new foams at a lot of training speeds for most people, especially not if you have a plate. And then having a plate in a training shoe all the time, I don't know. We don't have any data on that. I think you could make cases either way. I tend to think runners are going to figure out how to get injured anyway that they put anything they put on their foot. You just change maybe the location of the injuries based on some of that stuff. But yeah, so maybe it matters less from an actual performance side. And to be honest, there are some days when like lossy EVA shoes just kind of feel good on a slow training run. I more don't like the durability side of it. If I could, all of my if there was a brand that made the shoes that I wanted to run in with the foams that I wanted, I don't think any of my training shoes would be EVA, but it wouldn't be for the performance benefit. It'd be simply because I know they degrade at in a more uniform fashion than old shoes. So anyway, so that's another reason, is that it's like there's no strong push to get rid of it for a lot of training instances. I do think, to the question of running with plates in your shoes, like we don't know how much of that is good or bad yet, let alone on the trails. I would hedge on not getting away from having most of your training not being in that. I'm open to the idea that like people could do all of their training and just adapt. Because I think the fundamental human superpower is like our ability to adapt to things. Like we can, given sufficient recovery and rest, like stress promotes a hormetic response that we can get better and adapt to things. So I think like in the right circumstances, you could, and it'd be fine. I would think that those right circumstances arising you might expose yourself to more risk. I think it's a very safe bet to not do all of your training in them. And I mean, that to me, like even just by feel, like, again, it's like, we're not talking energy efficiency here. It's just like, what do you enjoy running in? Yeah, I like on just slow, easy days of just being in slow shoes. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's amazing to me. And again, this is more a hypothetical, but just thinking about some of the incentives you laid out there, going back earlier in your comment, it's wild to me that there could be a number of brands out there that are relentlessly and maybe even perversely optimizing for that first impression experience stepping into the shoe.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And undermining so many good things that could come out of another shoe that maybe requires a break-in period, but is more durable, more effective, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know as many shoes have much of a break-in period. I'll say that. Like that's something that, just because the foams, like they're usually like at their best from the start. The thing that does break in is like essentially how the upper gets a little bit worn to your foot. So maybe to your point of like figuring out how that aspect of the shoe works onto somebody's foot a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, I think, just the insoles in general. I mean, like I take the insoles out of my trail shoes because it's like, what are these doing? Like the only function of this is to like slip around when it gets wet. Like the only thing is to like, for some of the time, to give me a headache. And it's just, and you get more like, you reduce a node of like friction loss. It's like, why? And I would say like Killian's company, Normal, I loved what they did with that, of like, there are no like, why would you have an insole? Like that's useless. So anyways, all my trail shoes, I started taking the insoles out a while ago.
You think
I ran in those.
It's a waste.
Yeah, it's so wasteful. It's like, to me, from the performance standpoint, because I noticed it for the first time when I really liked some of the early versions of the Nike Pegasus Trail, but I hated the insole because it just like slip around under my foot, and it's like, why are we doing this, guys? This doesn't need to be here. And so I don't know, it massively improved my trail shoe experience just by simply taking those out. But yeah, part of the function of those is just to like feel comfortable when you put them on. standing there.
This is a little bit of a pivot. I'm also a fairly big cycling fan, and in
Nice.
cycling,
all right, let's talk.
Okay, so like the watt gain rules, right?
The
Just
what
like
rules? Sorry.
like the watt gain rules, like how cycling they'll regulate performance around like equipment advantages and stuff. Yeah, I've always wondered like how far away could we be for that in trail, where like you have so many pieces of publicly available data aggregated. Like if we get lab verified running economy data for every single one of these shoes, and there's just like a clearinghouse site on the internet where you can go check that out, and like that might override some of these instinctual hacks that are happening on first impression in the running store.
Yeah, I don't think that will happen. The diffusion of knowledge, hopefully, I think will like move away from like instinctual, like I think just education around that could change things. I mean, heck, I hate to say, I love specialty running stores, but it's like less and less people are trying shoes on anyways, I don't think anything like that. Cycling is very different in that like the optimizations are so measurable and uniform to certain things. But even with that, like any professional cyclist will tell you, like, it was like talking to Joe Dombrowski, who's an old USA pro, and he had a funny comment that was like, like my socks give me 5 watts, like these wheels are supposed to be giving me 15 watts, like the way that you're doing the handlebars now gives me another 10 watts. Like I don't feel 30 watts faster. So it's like that idea that like these quantifications you make, especially if it's done in a wind tunnel, is hyper constrained and like can fall apart in a variety of circumstances. Not to say they're not beneficial and contributing to people speeding up, but that alone is I think tricky, and it just relates back to what we were saying about the trails of like every small optimization you make might have an infinite number of environmental circumstances that completely erase it or even make it a liability. So I don't think we'll ever have that on the trails. Yeah.
Coming back to foams just for a second, like
I do think though, really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to see coefficient of frictions published on rubbers. That would be fun.
How come?
Just so you know, like how good a rubber, like what the characteristics of that rubber is under different conditions.
Yeah.
I think there'd be a better way to quantify. I also think similarly, like on a road shoe or a trail shoe, I'd love if we had uniform test methods for resiliency and compliance. Like, I mean, this was something that kind of when I was at University of Michigan still doing research was kind of one of my last projects, was developing some of those test methods. And how cool would that be to like know those stats on your foams, but I would say most companies don't even measure those well themselves, let alone the couple that do. They're not looking to publish them. But like having just more quantifiable things that are at least quantifiable about the shoe, like that'd be great to have that. Yeah.
Are those durometer metrics that we sometimes see, are those kind of a waste, or are they valuable as well?
Yeah, they're not super helpful. They'd be most closely related to like compliance, but it's not a great way of measuring it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like the durometer is going to be, when you see different durometers, if you were to plot out the durometer score and the compliance, you'd get like a nice linear relationship between those, but it's probably not a great thing for teasing out small changes, and also probably could be subject to different circumstances biasing the results. Yeah.
And then, so coming back to foams just for a second, like when I'm thinking about PIBA or TPU or this new one, PBAT, and let's just say with PIBA, for example, the what's marketed to me is 85% energy return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I expect any shoe with PIBA in it to abide by that, or are there spectrums of energy return within these foam types based on how they're constructed within the rest of the shoe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say there is a spectrum. It's not always going to be the same. I think it's like most of these foams across the companies come from a handful of very similar suppliers. So I would bet heavily you're not going to come across any PIBA that's like 60% or even like low 70s or something. I've tested PIBA shoes on a benchtop material tester from a variety of brands. And it always, my testing, I always had it between 80 and 85%. And so I think it's pretty constrained. Now, there are things you can do to it to actually even increase that more. And that's what we're seeing is like playing around with it a little bit to do that. But yeah, I would say as a general rule of thumb, without getting too in the weeds, if a company is using it in a shoe, I would bet a large amount of that it would be over 80%. Yeah.
Are you okay if we go a little bit over time? I have just a few more questions. Okay, cool. Some miscellaneous stuff here. I did write this one down. I wanted to make sure I asked you. And for context, I'm thinking about the advantage that pro athletes have, either real or perceived, over amateurs when it comes to gear because they're embedded in the brands.
Yeah.
Do you ever think we'll reach a point where we need to have some, I'll call it like a tech parity clause in the sport, where everyone who's on the start line of UTMB is required to be wearing commercially available footwear?
Yeah,
maybe. Or is the delta there between? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, to me, that actually would be probably the most likely next step in regulation for trail running. Like that's what cycling has. That road running has it to some extent. You're allowed to submit prototypes for like review, but it's under the clause that it has to be commercially available in some amount of time. So I could see that being the next step of regulation in trail running. I think that's actually like a very logical next step. I don't know if it should be there. Half of me likes the idea of like, I'm very torn on this. Half of me likes the idea of like having some level of regulation around that. I also like the idea of like having a team around you to build gear that's customized to you to do whatever you want. Like, you know, like I think that's there is something I like about that. Because I could also throw around the like, I think there is potential advantage to not having a gear sponsor, or to, like if you're able to make a living and train perfectly and whatever, to not being constrained to the product of one company, right? Like, I think there are a lot of Hoka athletes that did not have success on the roads for many years because they did not have a shoe that was competitive with other companies. So I would say, like,
for example, Jim, you think Jim might have missed that 100K world record because he was in the Carbon X and not?
Oh yeah, he left so much time on the table for that. Minutes, at least minutes. Or yeah, I mean, how many minutes is a subject of conversation, but like, yeah, I don't know. Now I would guess at least 5 minutes, maybe more. Yeah. So, and let alone like, they're marathoners and stuff that like, yeah, I think because one of the things that I was kind of excited about of shoes all of a sudden becoming this diverging point of benefit is like, maybe that could break the model of like shoe sponsors control, like being the dominant sponsor for athletes. Like bike companies are not the title sponsors in cycling, right? Like they don't have the money or reach to do that. It'd be cool for our sport to get to a point where a company that could draw more from the marketing value of athletes is beyond just simply trying to sell shoes. I think you're seeing a little bit of that, like with Wahoo, where there's like crossover, of like, it's like the Wahoo athletes. So someone like Jim doing well is like not just helping sell a running watch. It's like, it just increases the visibility of the brand in general. I would like to see that. And I was hoping, I'm like, that'd be cool that like you didn't have, now I say that, and every cycling team has a bike sponsor and like they're constrained to that, and they run into the same problem where like, some you switch teams to a better bike and you all of a sudden get a lot faster. But I think it would be, I mean, I'm somebody that when I used to have a shoe contract, and I for several reasons, like no longer wanted to have one. But one of them was like, I don't like being constrained to that. Like, I think that if that's our one piece of gear that is A, hyper personalized, and B, has an enormous potential, mediator of performance, like, I want to be able to choose whatever I want. Now, you don't have the benefit of having something that comes out, before it's publicly available, but you at least have the benefit of taking whatever the best thing on the market is at the time.
So you think we could be looking back 10 or 20 years from now at the current business model in the sport for athletes and maybe even laugh that the primary team source was like running for Hoka or ACG or Ultra, like that will, if we continue to professionalize, that will be outdated in the same way that it has been in cycling.
I think we should at least aspire to it. Yeah. I mean, you're already on the roads. It's like when I go and race comrades, I race for the Nedbank team. Like, that's the biggest bank in South Africa. Like, they have Nike as a minor sponsor of them, but they have this enormous, beautiful professional team structure. The NN running team is, it's a Dutch financial company or whatever, like that. They are the title sponsor. Like that. I think we should aspire to doing something like that, because like the marketing side of like trail athletes can help sell a lot of, they can help validate the product for trail stuff. But like, aside from some of the major multinationals of like, a Nike, certainly the smaller running shoe companies are so constrained in the investment that they would have to make to do that. It doesn't make sense from a marketing standpoint. But I don't know if a major grocery store chain, I mean, like, Aldi, Lidl, like, or Lidl, whatever.
Smith's here in Utah.
Yeah. I mean, I like my dream, old when I was, I was like, I would kill to like run for Trader Joe's. I don't think that they're interested in that, let alone me. But like, just thinking outside of like, that realm, like, I think a bigger company has potentially, with bigger reach, has more to gain from an investment, a big investment. So yeah, it would become very saturated for a shoe company. So I don't know if we'll look back and laugh, but like, I think we should at least aspire to that. And I strongly suspect things will evolve towards that. Yeah.
And so in that model, who ends up funding the R&D, and do these bigger brands that come to head the teams, do they just spread it out as they will over numerous brands, or do they end up forming a sub partnership? I'm curious there.
I think it'd be a partnership. Yeah. I mean, we see it, in like, you get that question a lot, because whenever you have partnering entities that both have a vested interest in like optimizing the performance. So cycling teams, they go to the wind tunnel and do all of that, and then they're feeding back to the bike companies. The bike companies go to the wind tunnel, do that. Like, but I mean, at the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, we also do, our own. We collaborate with different entities to do innovation projects. So I think you see it all over sport, of like, it's not necessarily on one entity when there's a mutual benefit to be had. Yeah.
It'd be pretty funny if Trader Joe's if they end up making a trail running team, they get so into it they end up building like an engineering arm of the company. They build these like deep tech ecosystems around, like, okay, we've hired someone to like monitor shoe stiffness and foam response and plate geometry and like weight distribution.
Yeah.
Like, that would be amazing if they had their own system.
But then they'd come up with like a great shoe, and then it'd be gone like 3 months later, and it'd never come back. So yeah.
But
yeah,
I still, and again, I could be very wrong, I get the sense, and even more so after talking with you, that we haven't seen a trail race outcome like at UTMB or Western States where the performance gap was due to shoe tech. I think it's, to me, it still seems like it's based on just like the inherent skill talent of the runner.
I don't agree with that. The only thing I would say though is I don't know to what extent. I think if you looked down the top 10 lists at Western States, for example, or UTMB, I think you would see there are people performing higher because of shoes that they had access to versus not. I think that's going on. Or, yeah, people not doing as well as they could do. The outright victories, yeah, probably not. I would say for a lot of the major races in recent years. I think you're correct in that respect. But I think if you were to look down top 10 lists of those, there's movement that would be had for sure.
Let me read out this. So this is the 20. That's a great point, by the way. You inspired me to go check out the 2025 men's top 10 list at Western States. So just by shoe, ACG wins, Caleb Olson. Brooks Cascadia elite with Chris Myers second. Killian in third normal. Jeff McGavro on probably in that Cloud Ultra Pro. Dan Jones, definitely plated shoe. Seth Ruling North Face. Ryan Montgomery Norda. Hans Troyer Ultra. And I don't know Peter Frano or Kai Hiroki where they're based, but what a distribution of brands.
Yeah.
And then also maybe to your point, maybe it is like maybe ACG had the best footwear on course this year. I don't know.
Maybe, or maybe, again, getting back to this, like my fundamental thesis in sports science is like maybe in spite of, like I have to say for myself, like I know the Hoka Tecton X3 is more beneficial than at least the old versions of the Ultrafly. Okay. I think those guys were probably racing in the newer ones, which I don't know 100%, but maybe. So like I'd take that over the Ultrafly any day of the week. But the newer versions of them seem ostensibly very similar to that. Yeah, so I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like I could make some guesses there of ones that would be different, but yeah, I definitely think if you put everybody in the same shoe, that order is different, let alone the people that are not in the top 10. Yeah.
Okay.
Caleb probably might still win. I mean, because even Killian, I think, is an interesting question there. Like I really like, I love like the normal shoes. Like I think those are they do a great job with those. On a course like Western States, I would not have raced in those though. I think they for me, they really shined. Like I ran a pretty technical, the Never Summer 100K 2 summers ago. And, it's like pretty as close maybe as we get to Alpine stuff. Some of it's pretty runnable, but some of it's chunky. I didn't like wearing the super shoes on it because of like some of the really uneven stuff. And so I loved the normal shoes were great for that. And that's an example of where like those being so light, like they feel almost like a road racing flat, like being so light and nimble are beneficial in uneven situations, but also you get that benefit of being super light, which in all cases is going to be better than not. But on something like Western States, that's closer to like, road running, having a super foam with plate in there. I know the like new normal, I think the new version of the Shrog is like, they've used a newer generation foam in that, which is, I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but could they have further iterated normal shoes to be a little bit better? That Killian go a little faster, maybe. But again, the deltas that you see time wise on that though might, like that's not going to get you back. How far back was he? Out of curiosity, from Caleb?
Killian was, I'm going to pull this up, but I believe he was about 8 minutes back from Caleb. So Caleb ran 14.
Okay. Well,
14, 12.
Then that's a conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an interesting thought too, because like, Killian has utter control over what he's wearing. And for all we know, I didn't look in detail or read in detail of like what I thought I remember reading that he ran most of it in the Shrog or the new version of it, but I could be wrong on that. So I don't want to spread fake information. But if that's the case, I think time was left on the table. And so that to me, I'm like, yeah, so maybe it is. Maybe that is an example of that outcome being different.
I think another thing that I wanted to ask you about, so obviously in our sport, there's a cohort of people who are super interested in just comparing historical times at races and course records and stuff like that. And then there's another camp, I think I fall in the latter camp, which is just like, we just love to watch good racing happen.
Yeah.
You know, I've always felt like it was a little futile to compare historical performances in trail because of so many different variables. But like the one that I want to talk with you about is just comparison in the context of evolving shoe tech. Like, do you see value in comparing historical performances with how much evolution is going on and how different generations of athletes had different access to certain tech? Like the person who won Western States in 2012 or before that, 2010, 2008, they're probably wearing EVA films, right? Whereas now it's PIBA and up.
Yeah. I'm not super interested in comparing historical performances in trail right now. I think the shoes are even like maybe just a fraction of it. Because one of the interesting things I think is historical performances on the roads is not that helpful because of the shoes, but that was a huge step change. But on the roads, we have we'll say 3 factors that have caused a big change in performance. The shoes are most of them. On the trails, it's like everything. Everything has changed in the last 10 years. Everything. I would say training theory is still not understood on the trails in ultra space in general. Like you could look at how on roads, training is so homogenous. Roads and track is some of the stuff looks different when you look at the structures of workouts and whatever. But by and large, weekly structures are so similar. You're not having people going out and smashing it every day, whatever. It's you have 2 to 3 hard sessions a week. One of them is probably a long run. It's so the differences are in minutia. Whereas on the trails, it's head scratching how wildly different it is. So training alone is just massively evolving. The shoes, definitely something that's going to contribute to things speeding up. I think fueling makes a way bigger difference than shoes. Understanding that better has really accelerated things. Just the professionalism and seriousness and depth of competition is also another accelerant. So I think all of those things, the sport is just changing so much right now that it's to me, 5-10 years from now, the course records that are still standing, then it starts to kind of become interesting. But I think we're just in a period right now where the historical piece is it's almost the null hypothesis to me is that it should change. But yeah, I don't know. I think the interesting thing is because even take someone like Jim, who has course records on a lot of the big, notable races. He himself is he's evolved as all of this stuff has evolved. And it's I don't know. I think that's an interesting question of him in 2016 or 17 versus now, obviously one is much wiser but actual physiologically speaking, right, of economy, efficiency, capacity, who knows? And that, not that those are the only determinants of performance in a trail context, but anyway, so all that to be said is even someone like him who has set a lot of course records that might last for a bit is he's evolving and changing during this time. So I don't know. I'm not. The historical piece for course records and things are not. It's less interesting. I fall in the camp of it not being super interesting right now. But what I do think that is fun is the course records that when the dust settles are still there. Getting back to a Matt Carpenter and his Pikes Peak records, those are just things of beauty that I don't know if stuff like that will ever be touched. But in the races that have huge competitive depth consistently each year, we're going to see those evolve. But also to your point of we don't even know, because that idea that our trails are 4-dimensional systems, every year is different. They change with time. Like the trails evolve over time, and then they're constantly changing with weather conditions. So one of the things that makes trail running so cool and so unique is the environmental challenge that we go up against, and the like that you don't know what it's going to be like. That at UTMB somebody could be both hypothermic and hyperthermic. So these things that these kind of like living organisms that are the trails, I think also further complicates that. And it's a beautiful thing because that's then it is like cycling, right? It's just racing. Like you're trying to win titles. You're trying to do, it's you're kind of removed from that.
Maybe the last question for you with a little bit of context. So, I'm paying attention to some of this stuff, and I'm super curious about like movement patterns and with like long-term exposure to these higher stack foams, plates, like are we changing those patterns? Is there any reset work that needs to be done? But I'm really curious, like for someone who's kind of in my mid 30s, but for someone that's coming up into the sport in their teens, younger 20s, like are we creating, like is this new market of footwear? What are the biomechanical dependencies that are being created? And what are possibly the unintended consequences of that, if any? Where do you come down on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know. And I think anybody that tells you they do know, raise your eyebrows. We're still figuring out. We're still trying to understand it. I can tell you some of the lessons I've learned in myself and observing others, and also maybe some theories. I don't think we're creating dependencies so long as getting back to that kind of heuristic of keeping the stimulation of your mechanical system varied, which I mean, trails themselves do that already for us, which is nice. But like having different shoes that you're running in alone, I think is like our dose response is, it's highly nonlinear, that like it takes a small dose of something if it's missing to get a big response. So that's why like if you go run barefoot for 10 minutes twice a week, you're going to do an enormous amount for like the resiliency of your musculoskeletal system and biomechanical activity. So it's like that idea that I think small amounts of just different types of footwear is going to be beneficial. So I think I'm not too worried about that idea of a dependency. I think it's an interesting question of like, over time, do we get more or less efficient in the super shoes? In the lab, studies I've done on myself, my benefit has been very stable over the last couple of years. I don't have data from when I first started running in them in the first like couple months, but like the last couple of years, I still use the same control shoe that I've used for a while. It's hard to get control shoes now because you don't have very many EVA racing flats available. But yeah, my benefit is like stabilized. So I suspect that I used to think that there was like potentially the possibility that you could get either more and more efficient in them, or either because you're using the tech better, or the opposite where you atrophy in the others in the capacity. I haven't seen that happen in myself. So that at least sort of simplifies things a little bit. I have done periods where I've done and this is on the roads, a dominant amount of training in plated shoes. I just found I didn't enjoy that as much. It was like when you, again, getting back to that idea of the benefit of them being speed specific, to some point, there is a thought that you kind of cross a threshold and at very fast speeds, it's pretty homogenous in the benefit. But so slower and slower for my training paces, they're probably mildly beneficial. But again, I was doing it more for the durability of the foam because those super foams are better than EVA from durability perspective. And I just like didn't like having that plate. It just didn't feel right at slower speeds. That being said, I've talked to like older runners who love it because it's like you get an elasticity back that you lose with age. So
even with
I don't know.
There's nothing to worry about with those, like with the more compliant foams. You have no worries about like elastic capacity or foot strength.
Because I think this is actually one of the fun things mechanically. We try really hard to maintain the bounce of our center of mass. So when we run on softer and softer surfaces, we actually stiffen our bodies up. So the soft shoes actually have a stiffening effect on our body, which then at that point you're essentially maintaining maybe greater tension. That could be a subtle thing, but I don't think it's I'm not too worried. I wouldn't be too worried about that. The question of foot strength, that's an interesting question, because you now have a very constrained movement pattern that used to be this three-dimensional complex thing. Now it's still three-dimensional, but it's much more planar. Yeah, so and you're doing work with major muscle groups as opposed to kind of orchestrating all of your intrinsic foot muscles a little differently. But again, that's where it's maybe I think one of the things I always thought is the more running that I do in super shoes, the more I would try and consciously add in things in the past I've done barefoot running. I've been jumping rope lately, but yeah, so I don't know, just being aware of that and constantly just not trying to have too constrained of a system. But again, there may exist a world or people that could do all of their running in. And like I said, I think you could probably adapt to do that safely and kind of retool your musculoskeletal system to handle those differential stresses. Now, the second part of your question, are the people coming up in the sport, that I think is one of the most compelling questions that I don't know as we'll have a great answer to.
Is it being researched?
Not that I know of. That's a challenging thing to do, but I think it'd be really interesting to look at youth athletes running in the new generation of footwear. I could make a couple different hypotheses. One, because, for most of us, we had our movement patterns kind of crystallized, and then we introduced these, and now we are adapting, or we're using them. If you started running in them when your movement patterns are still plastic, you could make a hypothesis, I could be refuted, but that you may be able to subtly adapt your movement patterns to better use those levers and differential, mechanical structures in that shoe.
Because everything just has more plasticity at that time in life.
Yeah. You're still everything's still adapting, from the connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, bone, to your muscle, to your neurological patterns of how you're orchestrating all of those together. And so I don't know. And this would be so hard to study. I mean, I guess if you had a large enough cohort of kids coming up that hadn't done much running, that then you're training them in these versus groups not, I think you could tease it out. But yeah, I don't know. I think because you hear a lot of people saying I don't want my kids running in these shoes, whatever. I don't know. If I was a parent, I would actually want my kids running in. I would, again, do all of the things that I was saying of making sure you're maintaining foot strength. But I do wonder of are you leaving a potential adaptation on the table of it's the idea of I don't know, the Brazilian kids, the British kids that grow up with a soccer ball at their feet from the time they can walk. They have a fluid mechanical, fluent mechanical, not even fluent, native mechanical language with these, right? You can get fluency later, but you can't become a native speaker. I wonder of that with the super shoes with kids. So I would, and to me, it's also a sad thing, because then that becomes a access issue, for some kids that have the privilege to be able to run in them, let alone the performance benefit that might open doors for them. But the fact that it could benefit them just down the road in general. That, not even to say then this is another interesting question of say there's not that mechanical adaptation piece. There does seem to be a benefit of them of lessening the eccentric cost of running, or the collateral damage of running. So if you can, I think this is we're seeing the second order benefit of the shoes right now, in that you have more and more athletes training in them and incurring less muscular damage. And the way I would kind of explain this you could think about it conceptually as like part of your task of adapting to training as a runner is literally just undoing the damage of your training session, like repairing the damage of the training session, let alone rebuilding new, better machinery. So it's like, you could think of like, say you've got your construction crew after each training session. In the past with old shoes, like maybe they had to come in and spend 80% of the time just rebuilding damaged roads and all of that. And they had 20% of their time and resources that they could now spend to, I don't know, enhancing the roads or building new stuff on the sides of the roads. Now, or building new parts of your city.
A new solar farm.
Now, yeah, a new solar farm. Now with the shoes, what if like you flip that, and it's certainly not like 20/80, but like what if it's 50/50 or 60/40 or 40/60? Like spend 40% of their time or 50% of their time rebuilding the damage, and then now they have the same resources now can be used. And when I say that, it's like that's building new mitochondria, like changing muscle fiber characteristics, like muscle architecture, things that are the steps we try and take forward in training that other endurance sports can do more efficiently because there isn't so much repair that has to go on. So I suspect that's one of the benefits. And so the youth question to me is interesting. Like I've never, like in my post-collegiate, professional, like whatever running career, I've never been as sore as I was as like a middle schooler, high schooler after certain sessions where it's like you feel like you've just like completely torched your muscles and they're rebar. I wonder, like, if you don't go through that or go through that to a lesser degree, can you adapt faster? Maybe. And so again, getting back to that question of like, I think kids coming up in the sport, I would bet on being an advantage having the shoes, not the flip side of it being detrimental.
Okay. Last question, I promise. And let's make one assumption. The assumption is that in this hypothetical person's quiver, there is no shoe with a carbon plate in it, but there may be some other variation of a quote unquote trail super shoe.
Yeah.
For someone that's getting ready for a race like Western States and they're training hard, if you look at their training cycle and what's on their feet on a day-to-day basis, do they still need to be conscious about cycling in and out certain shoes with different compositions? Is there a certain training ratio for all different types of shoes, no matter what, regardless of whether carbon fiber is present? Like, how do you think about that?
I think so. I think getting back to that idea of like, we need to be, I guess I have two answers. I think in general, we need to promote robustness in our bodies just to stay healthy. Because like that alone, like I think you expose yourself to exponentially more risk if you try and get hyper constrained. And then, yeah, maybe there's the tiniest percentage chance that it pays off, but I think it blows up. And if you elect to do things that do not train robustness in your musculoskeletal system, it will come back to bite you, and you won't perform at a high level when you could. So I think just having stuff built in, and I think rotating shoes is one of them. Yeah. So I think, and again, it gets back to that idea of like the trails demand that, like not just to stay healthy in training, but literally just to run fast on a trail. Like you need to have a robust, to quote the book, an anti-fragile musculoskeletal system. Exactly. So you need to have that, I think, to be a good trail runner. Now, I was going to say you could like, I don't know, like the way that I could envision it working at the other end of the extreme is like, I want to be good at this trail race. I'm going to be racing in these shoes. I'm going to do all of my training on this trail in these shoes. There's part of that appeals to me. Like, yeah, I don't know. I still think though that it would, especially when you have features in a shoe that have that are a little bit more perturbing to your musculoskeletal system, like, or have maybe a different way to say that is have highly anisotropic properties. So isotropic is the mechanical term for behaving in a certain plane one way.
Same value in different directions.
Yeah. I got that backwards. Isotropic is one value in one way, right? Whereas, or now am I getting this backwards? I've been out of the engineering game too long, I think. But yeah, anisotropic, like non-uniform. Yeah, you would the more and more you have things that behave in one plane or one direction differently than the other, I would say the more that becomes probably perturbing to the system, and you might not be good to spend all your time in it. So that's why something like a foam without much architecture in it is actually quite nice, because it's that would be anisotropic, I think, correct? Like you could perturb it from any direction and it doesn't matter how it behaves.
Yeah, I believe so.
So it's something that's isotropic, you perturb it in different directions and you get different responses. Whereas like as soon as you put a plate in it, you get that differential. So yeah, I think my hedge would be like you would run into issues eventually. So yeah, so long story short, I think the big takeaway is like not, I don't know, it's nothing, maybe it's a long roundabout way of getting there, but like I think in this age of super shoes, like there's enormous value to training them, to doing even a good chunk of your training in them. I think in some of my big trail blocks, I've done more than half of my training in the trail super shoes. But I think to go full on them is probably not the right thing to do. Yeah.
Geoff Burns, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I've learned a ton. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, pleasure.